and welcome to Voice with Julia and day 27 of our 30 days of breath support. Today is a very special day because we're going to be talking about supporting high notes and some of the pitfalls that can happen when we're singing high notes. But first, I want to invite all classical singers in the audience to check out our Luca Bel Canto Institute, which is happening this summer in Lucca, Italy, September 9th through 16th. The application is below, so check out the link, and if you're interested, make sure you apply early.
Voice with Julia, change your voice, change your life.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about high notes because these require basically no different support than what we've been doing, but it requires more optimized support. We've got to be very, very aware of what is going to want to happen. We have to be prepared that certain things will want to happen. And then we have to put in place mechanisms so that they don't happen. And we have to practice it and practice it and practice it until our bodies get used to this. Okay, so high notes are going to create a lot of pressure in the respiratory system, okay, because of the intensity of the quickness, not the amount. Keep in mind that it's not the amount of air. High notes actually require less air, but it requires a faster stream of air, okay, which requires a little bit more pressure, okay? And what happens when we have more pressure here is the body wants to pull in, okay? We want to pull in. So what I want to break down today is what should happen in order to help that airflow, but what shouldn't happen also. So essentially, when we're singing a high note and we're going to be sustaining it for any amount of time, in general, what's going to want to happen is this lower rib cage is going to want to come in to help, okay? Especially towards the end of the note. When we start feeling like we need a little bit more to send, okay, and it's not more airflow, but more of the jet stream, right? We're going to want to collapse the rib cage. Now, what we have to learn to do instead is manage it here. So this is why we say high notes require more support. We're going to need to feel that pull out first, right? So we don't blast the high note, but then as we're sustaining, we have to learn to pull in, okay? So this is kind of interesting and also is not like a one size fits all because there are different high notes depending on the phrase. But what I'm going to be talking about is a general rule and principles that you can apply that have to be adapted depending on what the musicality of the high note is, okay? Because if we have a beautiful floated high note in a phrase that comes up and comes down, it's going to be dealt with differently than a big loud high note that comes at the end of a cabaletta, right? That we have to hold out. This is very different, but in general, you'll understand the principles. Okay, so when we're going up to a high note, we want to not put air pressure onto the high note. We just don't want to, especially on the onset, because it's going to send too much air under our vocal cords and pressurize them and make them stiff. So regardless of where the high note is in the phrase or how it needs to be approached, you want to go out with the pelvic floor, down with the pelvic floor, okay? And not out with the stomach, no push, but release a little bit, but not full release because that's full release at the end of the phrase. We want to think about holding off the air from here, right? Now we still maintain our appoggio, we keep this out, right? But we release a little bit, okay? It's like a measured release. It's like we're doing this rather than that, okay? We're not fully letting go, we're managing, right? Then let's say we're going to sustain the high note for a little bit. So we come out on the onset. Then as we're sustaining, that's when this, our friend lower rib, is going to want to go, oh, let's help, and going to want to come in. Now, I'd love you all to go observe yourself in front of a mirror and without doing anything, because you will see most likely, even if the high note comes out well, you'll see that this really has a propensity to want to come in. So it is your job to start training that out. Now it's very delicate balance because we can't just push it, right? We can't just push it and create tension in the body. But we have to find that sweet balance between feeling the lower ribs keeping coming out and then engaging the pelvic floor and engaging the lower abdominals up and in to sustain the note, okay? So again, this is going to be necessary to hold a high note of any length of time, whether it's a beautiful piano arched phrase or whether it's a big, loud phrase. It's just going to be a matter of how much pull, okay? Or how much out, right? Depending on the kind of phrase. So you'll have to play with that, right? But the principle is still the same. So let's say we're gonna go up to a high note, okay? So we're gonna go C. Now what I did was I went C, and I went out and then I came in instead of allowing this to come in, right? Bum, bum. And then when I want to cut off the high note, I'm already in, so I can just release, right? So what you want to practice is look in the mirror and you want to hold these lower ribs. And as you're singing the note, you're going to feel the need to like send something or like squeeze in, but you can't squeeze in here. Why? Because there's just simply too much pressure when we allow the rib cage to collapse. There just is. So we want to manage it from here, okay? So yes, it does have to come in, but we can't do it from here. We do it from here. So as you're holding that note, you're going to feel in, and that's that really low pelvic floor support. The higher the note, the more it's only going to come from the pelvic floor, not from the lower abs, okay? So you need to also remind yourself about this. The higher the note, the lower the support, and that's where you will squeeze. So let's say you're singing a high C, right? Tenor, soprano, whatever. That's going to be quite high. That's really low. And so as you're sustaining, you're going to squeeze, 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 right? But keeping this out, and then on the release, you release just the pelvic floor, but you may not feel this go out, and you don't want to do that either, okay? Especially on a high note, you don't want to allow this to collapse on the release, or you're gonna get a very unpleasant sound up top. So this is something to work on, right? As you're kind of observing yourself, what wants to happen as you sustain that high note? Does this lower rib want to come in, right? Most people's do, and that's natural, but it's not what we want to do for singing, okay? So that is where you have to find this balance of staying buoyant and also being insistent that it stays out. Now, what does that mean? What should it look like? Because sometimes you're feeling the buoyancy, and for all intents and purposes, it's working, but you still see it coming in a little bit. So you have to know your body, and you have to know the parameters of how much your ribs move, right? Because if your ribs move a lot, right, it may come in a little bit, and that's okay, maybe, right? We want to check, but for your body, it may be a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, right? So you want to make sure that for your body, you're optimizing that and that you're not pushing so drastically out that you're creating tension in another area of the body, okay? So this is really like refining. This is not different than any technique that we've talked about before, but this is a special pitfall that happens in high notes, which we want to be really aware of, okay? So again, we're optimizing, we're repeating all of these same principles over and over each day, and we're making them work for us and kind of maintaining this understanding of how our bodies should work in singing in general. But today we've looked at high notes, okay? So I hope that this can help and that you spend some time with this concept, because this may take a little bit of mirror work and a little bit of body awareness work. But I think this was very helpful once you get this mastered. Okay, and I'll see you tomorrow.